How Africa was colonized. The story they never told us. An emotional African folktale told as a prose narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, gather your thoughts for a moment and imagine an Africa that existed before the arrival of foreign powers. Imagine a continent where kingdoms flourished, where cities traded with distant lands, where scholars studied the stars, where craftsmen shaped iron into tools and weapons, and where every community understood that its greatest wealth was not gold, but its people. Our elders often say, "A tree that forgets its roots will soon be carried away by the wind." That proverb is not merely wisdom, it is a warning. To understand the present, we must first understand the past. We must revisit a time when Africa stood confidently on its own feet and ask a simple but profound question. How did such a vast and resourceful continent come under foreign domination? The answer is not as simple as many history books would have us believe. Colonization did not begin with armies marching across the land. It began with curiosity, with trade, with promises, and with opportunities that seemed harmless. It arrived quietly, like a traveler seeking shelter from the rain. The visitor asked only for a place to rest, but before long he had rearranged the furniture, taken possession of the house, and declared himself its owner. For centuries, African kingdoms had engaged in trade across deserts and oceans. They exchanged gold, ivory, salt, textiles, knowledge, and culture with neighboring civilizations. They had their own systems of governance, their own laws, and their own ways of resolving disputes. They were not perfect societies, no civilization ever is, but they possessed dignity and independence. Then ships began appearing on the horizon. To many communities, these visitors seemed extraordinary. They carried unfamiliar goods, advanced weapons, colorful fabrics, and technologies never before seen. Their arrival inspired fascination rather than fear. Hospitality, one of Africa's oldest virtues, compelled local rulers to welcome them. But history teaches us that not every smile conceals friendship. The strangers observed everything. They studied the rivers, the forests, the minerals beneath the soil, and the relationships among neighboring kingdoms. They discovered not only Africa's wealth, but also its vulnerabilities. They learned that while many communities were strong, they were often divided by rivalries and competing interests. This realization changed everything. Instead of conquering immediately, they cultivated alliances. They supported one chief against another, armed one kingdom against its neighbor, and encouraged suspicions where trust had once existed. The greatest victories were not won on battlefields, but in conversations held behind closed doors. An old African saying reminds us, "The stranger inherits their father's land." Few proverbs describe this period more accurately. Gradually, internal conflicts weakened once powerful societies. Communities that had traded peacefully for generations found themselves locked in cycles of distrust and violence. While African kingdoms fought one another, foreign powers strengthened their own positions. Then came another tragedy that would leave scars across generations: the forced removal of millions of Africans through the transatlantic slave trade. Families were separated. Entire communities were emptied. Mothers waited at village paths for children who would never return. Fathers disappeared beyond the sea, leaving behind stories that ended in silence rather than reunion. Even after this devastating period, the ambitions of European powers did not end. During the 19th century, they turned their attention from controlling trade to controlling territory itself. Thousands of miles away from Africa, political leaders gathered around conference tables and drew borders across maps they scarcely understood. Rivers, languages, cultures, and centuries-old relationships were often ignored. Imagine strangers dividing your family home without ever asking permission. That is, in many respects, what happened to much of Africa. Yet perhaps the deepest wound was not the loss of land alone. It was the gradual erosion of confidence. Many Africans were encouraged to believe that their traditions were inferior, that their histories were insignificant, and that progress could only come through abandoning their own identity. Languages faded. Oral histories disappeared. Cultural institutions weakened. But there's another side to this story, one that deserves equal attention. The spirit of Africa was never extinguished. Across villages and towns, elders continued telling stories beneath moonlit skies. Parents preserved songs that no decree could silence. Communities safeguarded customs that no empire could erase. The determination to remember became an act of resistance. History, therefore, should never be understood merely as a record of conquest. It is equally a record of survival. The lesson for today's generation is not to dwell in bitterness, but to cultivate wisdom. The past cannot be rewritten, but it can be understood. And when it is understood honestly, it equips us to build stronger institutions, foster unity, and protect the dignity of future generations. Our ancestors left us one final reminder. The river may be blocked for a season, but it will always seek its path to the sea. So too has Africa endured. Empires have risen and fallen. Borders have changed. Flags have come and gone. Yet the continent remains alive with resilience, creativity, and hope. The greatest question before us today is no longer how Africa was colonized. It is whether Africa will fully reclaim its story, its confidence, and its future.